Hey, everybody. Welcome to this month's episode of Developers Digest. I'm so happy to be joined by another new co-host, Daniel Robleski. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. This is exciting. This is a new experience for me.
Nice. Well, I think if you've seen some of the episodes already, it's pretty casual. We're just going to go through the usual stuff that we talk about, different segments that relate to developers and our audience of SAP and non-SAP developers. But first, I think since you are new, it would be nice if the audience got to know you a little bit. You're new to the Developer Advocates team this year, I believe. So can you tell us where you're located and how you ended up on this team?
Yeah, sure. I came to the Developer Advocates just January 1st. And I used to be in charge of all the tutorials for developers. And before that, I was a documentation person, technical writer, user assistance person. They always change their names. And I'm located in Israel, a little north of Tel Aviv. And very exciting to be here.
How long have you been in Israel?
Well, we moved exactly 20 years ago, this past May.
Very nice. And I'm going to steal a little bit of your demo thunder. I know you're going to do a demo for us later, but I know one of your personal things that you're very involved in is the sport of baseball. You're still connected to it as an umpire. What is that like? How are you still an umpire for baseball when you're in Israel?
Well, we have baseball also. I'm actually the chief umpire for all of Israel baseball. And we have a baseball leagues of all ages and adult leagues. So there's a lot of baseball happening here.
Nice. We have, of course, baseball here in America. It's been a holiday week. So, of course, a lot of people are watching baseball games and different things having to do with summer because we're in the middle of it's a very hot time here. But I don't want to steal my own weather report. Anyway, very cool that you have baseball in Israel. I think years ago I saw a documentary about that, but I think it's probably a smaller focus than it is in America.
Yes, well, America has a lot of baseball, but we have for a small country like ours, there's a good amount of baseball.
Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's great for the audience to get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
Any questions for me?
Well, what did you do on Independence Day during the holiday?
So, like most Americans, we could watch fireworks, so we could hear them. We actually could see them from our balcony. We're very lucky to have a view, so we could see some without having to drive and sit in traffic to go watch them. Just had a few friends over, and ate some typical American barbecue food like the hot dogs, hamburgers, salads, and had a couple of drinks and relaxed. And once we were done with that, we started packing and we took my son out to his university in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's going to be a freshman this fall. So we went for what's called orientation and let him kind of see the university and how it's laid out and how he's going to experience his fall.
I remember those days. Is he really excited about it?
He's very excited. He's computer science is right now his choice of study, his major. Yeah, so it's easy for me to talk to him about things like music and computer science and programming. And so he doesn't quite understand everything we do at SAP, but he understands computer languages probably better than me. And so it's very neat to see where he's going to go with his future career. And I'm excited for when he starts to get internships and co-ops and gets to maybe even come to SAP or another company like ours and do some programming in the real world.
Well, good luck to him. Just tell him to follow the SAP Developers YouTube channel. That'll help him a lot.
Of course, and all the tutorials that you helped for years curate, because certainly. I know we've got a lot of great tutorials out there. So we're just a plethora of knowledge for all these young people that are coming up in the ranks.
Yes.
All right. Well, I want to get going with the show. We've only got so much time, of course, with every episode. So can I ask you to do me a favor and go through the agenda for today's show?
Yeah, sure. Certainly. We're going to start with a recent segment from the developer news. Then Nico, one of our developer advocates, is going to come and give a recap of his UI5 code challenge. Then we're going to have our regular weather reports. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to take you through a recent demo where I actually created a baseball app with AppGyver. Then we're going to have an expert interview with Max McPhee from SAP Process Automation, and he has a lot of ideas and news to share. And finally, we're going to have our trivia question. And Josh, I know you're going to give the answer at the end of the show.
Yeah, trying to mix it up a little bit. We've done it where I've had you wait a month for the answer, and some people are tweeting or, making a comment on LinkedIn. But this time, I want to go ahead and just tease people now with the question, and then you can make a guess now or later, and then I'll reveal the answer at the end of the show. But I think it's pretty easy for certain people to guess this one. What year did SAP make CAP, our cloud application programming model, generally available?
I'm really not sure. I wish I had DJ on my side right now.
Yes, a lot of people love having DJ right there with them, and he is a big fan of CAP.
Right. I'll wait for the answer.
Cool. All right. Well, I think now it's time for developer news, right?
Yes, sounds good.
All right, let's go ahead and play that clip.
Developer news.
Developer news.
Developer news.
The SAP Cloud Application Programming Model, version 6.0, was published this week. Have a look at the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model release schedule in the help documentation, and you notice that this is the major yearly release. There's details there about all that entails, but it means that the former 5.0 version is now in maintenance mode with only critical bug fixes that will be supplied. It also means that version 4.0 goes to end-of-life status, and in keeping with alignment with the underlying Node.js runtimes, it means that support is now dropped for Node.js version 12. But it isn't just about the availability of versioning. There's also lots of great new functionality that's available. I could only pick out a few of the highlights. Be sure to refer to the release notes that are available in the packages themselves and on the help documentation site for full details. But a couple that I picked out were the ability now, in addition to importing service definitions with EDMX, we can now import open API definitions as well. The formerly experimental GraphQL support moves into an early general availability status and is now delivered as a separate package that you can bring into your project under the @SAP/CDS GraphQL. And all the instructions on how to use this new package are available in the README of the package in NPN. And finally, the Cloud Application Programming Model now has new functionality to help you deploy your applications to Kima and Kubernetes. There's a new command, CDS add Helm, which will add Helm charts to your project, as well as a new deployment guide coming soon to the online help. So, as always, check out the full release notes for all the other great new functionality that we didn't have time to tell you about. And if you're looking for more Cloud Application Programming Model news, there's also great news about the Recap event. The Recap of Recap is now available, meaning the online replays of all the great sessions that took place at the beginning of June event are available for you to view. So if you missed any of Recap eventually, go ahead and check out those recordings.
That was a great segment. I really love helping to put together the developer news each week, and I hope everybody learns something from it.
I agree. I think it's great that the developer advocates get to connect, our external audience with all the great stuff SAP is doing. There's so much knowledge out there that we can give them because there's just so much different things that we're doing in a technology space like ours. Speaking of which, we have these code challenges happening, and I want to jump right in now to the code challenge that Nico from our team, he did this one in Waldorf on UI5. So please enjoy.
Thanks, Josh and Daniel, and hi everyone. I'm Nico, also a developer advocate at SAP, and in June, UI5 was the community spotlight. What that means is we had a UI5 code challenge running, and it was about testing UI5 apps with VDI5. And what's VDI5? VDI5 is UI5's newest end-to-end testing framework, which means it's a testing framework that tests an app basically just like user would. So it opens a Google Chrome browser window, it navigates through the pages, it clicks on buttons, it enters text input, things like that. And we've designed the challenge in a way that you have to build an app that passes predefined tests. So I was the one who predefined or wrote the tests, and the community submitted their apps that all passed the predefined tests. And I would say we check out the challenge real quick, check out a submission that we got that I really liked, and then we will see what's coming up in the future. All right, let's go. So in here, or in my browser here, we can see that I've written a blog post in the SAP community outlining all the details regarding the challenge. And in the quick links here, we get to the GitHub repository, right? And the GitHub repository is the central starting point for everything, where we have the starter project. It's an empty UI5 application. You can check that out here in the web app, but nothing fancy there. But what's actually cool is that we have the test files in there. So we can check out one of those test files real quick. So this right here, for example, is a VDI5 test file. It describes the test, right, for week 1. By the way, we had weekly challenges, so we added one test file every week, which allowed for multiple entries if you were fancy, or you could only submit one entry at the end of the challenge with all the weeks combined. But we wanted to, make it easier to start, so we sort of had an easy start with just one test file, and then moved on from there. And for week 1, we had one main page that people had to build, and it should have the right title. UI5 challenge, has to be the title of the HTML document. Then we want to have one button, and that's actually where VDI5 comes into play, because we can grab the elements by their UI5 ID and also by their view name, right? So that's sort of specific to VDI5. That's pretty cool. And yeah, that button should have the text, so the text must not be equal to an empty string. So that's just an example for one test file. And people built their apps and they submitted a pull request, so we can check those out here as well. And there was one that I really liked. That was this one right here from Nair Sumesh. I liked a lot of pull requests, but that one in particular. And we can see all the commits from Nair here. That's pretty cool. And then what's really cool, I think, is that we see the checks as well. And one of those checks was a GitHub action that we set up, and it was basically running the VDI5 tests just like the participants of the challenge did on their local machines. So there was an npm script in the project that was just npm run tests, and that's what we did here in the GitHub action as well. So on every pull request, we could see whether the VDI5 tests were passing or not. So that CI/CD pipeline architecture sort of was very cool for that challenge, and definitely something you should look into if you want to build this into your own projects, maybe. And if you scroll down a little here in the logs of that action, you can see that the tests were all passing, right? So for week 1, that was the test file we just looked at a minute ago. It did have the right title. It did have a button with text. So that was all cool, right? And I would say let's actually check out that project in a little more detail. I already cloned the repository to my local machine and moved to the correct branch. So that's the forked repository from Nair, and I cloned that to my local machine. And we can say npm start to start the app. Just to check it out real quick. Oh, that's good. So we can see that Nair built a pretty cool to-do list. And one thing that I definitely have to do is record this Developer Digest show here. So let's put that on the to-do list. I just hit enter. I can check it because that's sort of almost done. And then I can clear the completed ones. It navigates to a new page. I can open a dialog. So those were all requirements of the VDI5 test, right? The dialog, for example, or the navigation. And that all works beautifully. So let's also run the tests on my local machine here so that you can see how that works with Google Chrome popping up. So I will open a new terminal here and say npm run test. and now it's doing its thing. 3 Google Chrome windows are opened. You can't see them because they are on top of each other, but because we have 3 test files, right? And you can actually see the app, so all works fine. It's navigating through the pages, and we get the 3 weeks, the 3 test files for the 3 weeks, and all tests are passing. So that's all working well. So that was the UF5 Community Code Challenge. I think that's pretty cool, like architecturally. I really like that setup with the GitHub Action. And if you are curious what other people built, you can check out the corresponding Coffee Corner thread. Also here in the blog post, we have the, where is it? Yeah, here it is. The Coffee Corner thread. You can check out all the other submissions. And for July, so for next month, we also have a new code challenge, which my colleague Kevin set up. And I think I have it somewhere here. Yeah, here it is. So now after UF5, it's cloud native time. So I think he built something regarding the BTP Kima environment, and I'm very curious to check that out, so I'll definitely make sure to do that, and you should too. And I think with that, we're done, and I will hand it over back to Josh and Daniel. Bye-bye.
As you can see, Josh isn't here. That's because he has a weather report to give us from a new location. Hey, Josh, where are you, and what's the weather like?
It's hot.
Thanks, Josh, for that brilliant weather report. Now it's time for a subject I focus on, which is low-code, no-code, and particularly AppGyver. Oh, welcome back, Josh.
Whew, thanks, Daniel. I heard you were going to do your next segment, so I want to make sure I was back in time. I was remembering earlier you talked about you're going to do a demo on low-code, no-code, and can you tell me more about the baseball stuff in that and what it's actually going to look like on the screen and describe the canvas to people a little bit?
Yeah, sure. As you know, I'm doing an 100 days challenge for low code, no code, and I've been doing AppGyver, and I've been learning all about the features and what AppGyver is all about. And to do that, I create a baseball application where I bring baseball statistics, and you can create your own fantasy league teams within the app.
Okay, and I've watched this video already, and I noticed that you use the Atlanta Braves. Did you know that I was born in Atlanta, and that's my favorite baseball team?
No, I didn't know that. Who did you root for?
Yep.
Which players?
So I started at we're talking old now, in the 1980s, right? It was Dale Murphy was the most famous Braves player on the team.
Wow.
And ended up relocating to Newtown Square, where I live now, outside of Philadelphia. And Dale Murphy actually played for a while in Philadelphia before he ended his career. I think he ended in Colorado. But anyway, so started with Dale Murphy and then went all the way through the very good but painful years where they won 14 division championships, I believe, from 1991. And they only won 1 World Series while I lived there in 1995 against what I think was a better Cleveland team. But anyway, they won a World Series while I was there, and then they just recently, last year, won their 2nd World Series.
So I probably shouldn't tell you that I'm a Yankees fan. I'll keep that to myself.
I mean, if they could have lost 2 World Series to one team, it could have been anybody but the Yankees. But the fact that they had to lose to them, and that was when, what's his name, Jeter was really successful. Apparently that guy was pretty good.
I heard about him, yes.
Yeah, we don't need any more Yankees stuff. Let's just talk Braves. Okay, so let's go back to your demo. So after that, you're going to have a process automation interview?
Yes, I spoke with Max McPhee from Product Management about SAP Process Automation. It only came out officially about 6 months ago, and only a couple of months ago, they started offering free tiers so people can, start using it, playing with it, for free, and seeing what it does. So he'll be around. I talked to him about all the new things that are happening and what's so special about SAP Process Automation.
Awesome. I think we should show both of those videos now.
Sounds good. Thanks, Josh. Happy to demo AppGyver. We'll create a simple master detail application. I'll go against a public API that brings back baseball information, because I like baseball. but we could have easily taken OData services from an SAP backend. So let's get started. The first thing we have to do is we have to define our data resources. I've already created two, one that brings back the teams and one that brings back a specific player. But we also need one to bring back all the players on a specific team. So I will say that I want a new REST API, and we will give it a name, players on team. And now, since this is a collection, we will define the collection path. And we also have to tell it where in the response this list of players will be. So I tell it that. Now we have to define some query parameters. What's nice about this interface is that I can define query parameters, static, dynamic, URL placeholders, headers, even some binding logic. We'll start with the first parameter, is the start season. And this will be static, and we'll define it as 2022. And we'll do the same thing for the next parameter, which is end season. It will also be static and 2022. And what's nice is we have a third parameter, that's the team ID, the team from which to take the players. And this will not be static, and it will not be optional, and we will supply it at runtime. So now we've defined the data resource, we can test it. But of course we need to supply a team name, a team number. So I'll provide 121, which is the Mets, and I'll run the test, and it brings back players. And from this, I can define the schema, so I will have the schema when I use it in the UI. So that's all we need to do for the data. Now let's go to the UI and define the UI. This is our default UI that we get. We don't need this text box. And we will define a title. So we'll say find player. And now we want a control that will let the user select a team. So a nice control for that is the drop-down control. And we could easily use this for selecting sales orders or whatever is in the SAP backend. And we will define a title for that. So this will be, let's say, MLB Teams. And then we will say for select option, we will say select team. And now we want to bring in the data from the API call. So the way that's done, we've only defined the data resource. We create a variable, a data variable. And we will say that it's based on the teams, because we want to show the teams in that drop-down list. So we'll say teams. It's already a collection, so that's fine. And we'll say save. Now we'll go back to the UI, and we need to define the values here. So what we will do is we will create a formula, and we will say we want to populate this drop-down with this formula, because this formula will go through the teams and just extract the full name and then the team ID. So we'll say save. And we can run it in the mobile device. And we see that if we click on the drop-down, we already have all of the teams listed there. So now we want to select one and show all of the players on that team. So the first thing we need is a variable that will hold the selected team. So we will go to page variables and add a variable. We'll call it selected team, and it will be of text, and that's all we need to do. So we'll go back and we'll say when anybody selects a team, we will put the team ID in that page variable. So now we have the selected team. We want to create a list of players. So we will first add a divider, and then we will add a list item that will be the base control for every player. But we want this player to be repeated for each of the players. So we have a nice property called repeat with, and as long as we supply a list, it will duplicate this control as many times as needed. Again, we need a data variable. to hold the players. And this time we'll create a data variable based on players on the team. But we need for this variable to supply a team ID. And that team ID, as we know, is being stored in the page variable called selected team. So now we'll save. We'll go back to the view and we'll say we want to repeat this with the data variable players on team. We want the primary label to be players' first name and last name. I like to do the last first, so I save that. The secondary label will be the primary position of the player, and we will save. You already get a preview from the actual data, so now we will save. And as you can see, if I select a team, I will get all of the players. But one thing you'll notice is that it takes a few seconds after selecting the team to see the players. So I don't particularly like this. So I want to fix this, and I'll show you why this thing happens. If we go to the data variables, which is what triggers the actual call to the backend, we can see that there's a logic here that says whenever the page is loaded, it will get the record collection and bring it into this variable. And then it will wait 5 seconds and do it again. So that's why it takes up to 5 seconds for us to see the results. But I don't like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove this delay. And second, I'm going to say that the event I want to get the records on is not when the page loads, but when the variable selected team changes. So now I've done that, I can save. And now you can see the application immediately updates as soon as I select a team. Now all that's left is to create the detail page. So let's go to all the pages and say we want to add a new page, and we'll call it player. And every time we come to this page, we need to provide a player ID. So we define that by adding a page parameter, and we call it player ID. We also need to make a REST call to get the information about the player. So of course we need a data variable, and that will go against the player resource. And that is a single data record. And as soon as we do that, we see that we need to supply an ID. But that ID is supplied in the page parameter. So we can bind this player ID from the page parameter. And we can save, and we can go back. And all we need to do is to say that the headline is bound to a data variable that is the name of the player, display first and last, and this will be the name of the team. We'll save. And now if we run the application, we can select a team and display the player. I'm Dan Wroblewski from the Developer Advocates Group, and I'm happy to be joined by Max. Max, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Daniel. Thanks for having me. My name is Max McPhee, and I'm from SAP's SAP Process Automation product management team. I'm working from San Francisco, California, and I've been with SAP for about 2 years now, primarily focused on the process automation space. And prior to joining SAP, I was actually an automation developer myself, working primarily around finance use cases, starting off with the classic use case of accounts receivable automation.
So you've created a lot of automations yourself.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to get some hands-on experience, be able to kind of learn what it takes to go through, especially navigating within the business itself, how to build these processes and learn about what we need to understand within the process before we can get started to automate it. And it was a lot of great experience to then be able to start working at SAP to make it a great solution for being able to build these process automation projects.
Well, that sounds great. So I've heard a lot about SAP Process Automation. I think it was released earlier this year, and I think it's now available free tier since a couple months ago. What's so special about it, and why should developers be excited?
Yeah, so SAP Process Automation just came out on February 14th, or Valentine's Day. So
nice.
It's been about 4 months since it's been released, and it's really an exciting product that actually comes from two other existing products at SAP. So it's the combination of our RPA tool, SAP Intelligent RPA, and our workflow management tool, SAP Workflow Management. And we saw that there was a really interesting opportunity for use cases where you combine the two products together, where you have a workflow that goes across as kind of the hierarchy for the process. And within that, you have steps that maybe are calling an API in order to take an action, or in instances where we can only do an action through the user interface, we're able to leverage automations. And we saw that customers were starting to use these two products together. And so we wanted to make sure that they had a really nice connected development experience. And so we brought them into one single solution.
Just to make it clear, can you give some examples of how I would use SAP Process Automation?
Yeah, so I think one that is really one of my favorite instances or examples of how we can use SAP Process Automation is going to be one of those examples where, depending on how the process flows, either we run it and use an automation or we use an API. So we have a process that we've been working on that is focused around working with invoicing. And depending on where the invoice is coming from, we either have to go into Ariba to be able to submit some of that information, or we can leverage an API and connect with S4. And so within this process, we're able to use things like the business rules in order to determine which path to go down. And then once it's decided to either use the automation or go through the API, it's able to take that action and then reconnect back into the single path and provide that confirmation back to the end user. With SAP Process Automation, one of the additions that we're seeing is also working closely with the SAP Launchpad. And so we're now able to have an inbox where you're able to see all of the confirmations for these processes. And so it's a great way to have kind of a single source of truth to your processes.
Sounds really cool. There must be a lot of different scenarios that could be used to automate processes. Let me ask you a slightly different question. I know SAP Process Automation is part of the low-code, no-code portfolio, but how does it really work together? How do the different products like WorkZone and AppGyver play together with SAP Process Automation?
Yeah, so when we're looking at this low-code, no-code portfolio, one of the ways that we'll see them get connected is by having just this shared development environment. So we have the application development area where from there you can choose to launch and create a new process, or you can choose to launch and create an AppGyver app. And so this allows you to have one single area where you're developing either one of these projects. And then when we're looking at actually connecting the two, we can see that there are opportunities to leverage AppGyver to create a great user interface for an end user, and then be able to quickly connect that with a process automation project by using an API trigger. So that's just one of the options that we have for kicking off a process, is using an API. And so that allows us to connect with other applications like AppGyver. One of the other kind of interesting ways that I've seen that being used that I think is kind of an exciting use of those API triggers is being able to use conversational AI. Another one of the great kind of low-code products at SAP for being able to develop a chatbot. And you can use that as the way to have a conversation almost with an end user, get information from them, and then be able to use that to start a process.
Oh, that's really cool. So we have, for the most part, business process experts who understand the processes, who have a set of no-code or low-code tools that they can do most of the work in to build these things, right? I mean, that's the idea. That's why these products are the low-code products, so for the business process experts. Yes?
Yes, exactly. So kind of going back to my experience of being an automation developer, one of the really difficult parts was that if I wanted to be able to go and automate a team's use case, I had to almost be onboarded onto that team, fully learn the process, have that knowledge transfer in order to then first learn, how do we go through and improve this process? And then how do we go ahead and automate that now improved process? But one of the great opportunities with the low-code, no-code process automation tool is that that business process expert who already has that in-depth knowledge, they already know where they want to try and improve that process flow, if they can then take this low-code, no-code tool and implement that, it allows you to save a lot of cycles of not having to do all that knowledge transfer. But instead, when you're looking for support from maybe a more advanced developer, that can come at the end of the time when you're developing that process, when maybe you want to add in some additional error handling, or just some extra steps that maybe are a little bit more advanced, but aren't necessarily related specifically to that process. So things that somebody can come in and be able to add just a little bit of polish at the end of the process without having to have in-depth knowledge of that actual process.
I see. And also, IT can create these actions, I think they're called, that sort of modules to make them available to the business process expert to include in their automations. Is that right?
Yes, and so these actions are a great way to be able to kind of allow these end users who are developing these process automation projects to use APIs without having to have that in-depth knowledge around how to use an API call, how to set up the destinations and get everything ready for it. Instead, they can leverage an action project that has been developed by one of the members of their IT team.
I get it. What are some maybe recent improvements to SAP Process Automation? And maybe some hints at what's ahead in the next year, if you can.
Yes. So some of I'd say the most exciting parts are going to be the ones that I'm seeing that are new. I actually come from the intelligent RPA side of SAP Process Automation. So I had more of the knowledge around the actual UI automation side. And so being able to see these features that we have coming over from workflow, like forms, which is a great way to be able to get information from an end user and kick off a process, as well as business rules to be able to help set which way should we go through the path of this process, has been really exciting. And it's just been opening up my mind onto the different possibilities of what you can automate once you have the opportunity to start a process with a form on demand and then be able to have it go through. And whether you can use an API to take an action or you need to go through the user interface and use an automation, being able to have it go down the proper path for that process has really just been a eye-opening experience. And I'm looking forward to finding what use cases I can come up with next, being able to leverage the combination of these two products in the single SAP Process Automation.
It sounds cool. I've done the learning journey, and I've also actually created some automation. It's too complicated to explain, but I just think it's really cool that I can just fill out a form and all of a sudden this process goes and emails are being sent and things are being done on my desktop. And, in the end, emails are sent, things are sent to my inbox. I just think it's the coolest thing. Anyway, for developers who are interested in getting started and really working with this, what can they do?
Yeah, so as you touched on, we do have the learning journey, which is a great way to get started with SAP Process Automation and get that foundational understanding of how to actually use the different components that make up SAP Process Automation. But in addition to that, one of my favorite ways to recommend getting started is actually going to the SAP Discovery Center, which can easily be accessed at sap.com/disco. And from here, you can go through and search for SAP Process Automation, and you'll see some of the different discovery missions that we have available. And these are all laid out in a great way where it has just different milestones to go through the process of actually building that automation. And it actually starts off from how do I procure the free tier for SAP Process Automation all the way to the end of having that project created. One of the ones that I would suggest is going to be the invoice processing use case, because that gives you an opportunity to actually experience the embedded OCR tool that we have for being able to extract information from an unstructured document like a PDF.
I've also seen, when you open the tool, there's a tab called Store, and there's dozens of basically pre-built projects, and it's made in such a way that you can import them and you can run them right away, and then you can modify them. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the Spot Store is a great place to get started. That's going to be kind of more of that no-code side of things, and being able to use some of these processes that are addressing the more standard use cases that we've seen. They're being created by the actual product teams at SAP. So our S4 pre-built bots are developed by the S4 team. So they have an in-depth knowledge in how the best way to approach that process is. And so on top of being able to use these to actually just quickly implement them and see that value very quickly, I also leveraged those in order to actually learn what is the best practices with SAP Process Automation. I went through the different pre-built bots and was able to see, all right, how are the S4 developers going through and building out their automations? Which steps are they using here? And I was able to use that to learn what's the best way to approach building my processes.
That's pretty cool. Anyway, Max, I really appreciate getting to talk to you about SAP Process Automation and letting our developers know how to get started. So thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Wow, that was really cool stuff. Daniel, I loved seeing you go through the application and change it and add things to the actual drop-down menu that you're going to put into the roster choices, and seeing the baseball player selection menu change in real time. And then to go into the SAP Process Automation story. Great interview. Really, it's nice new things that are coming out that has to do with all of SAP's developer landscape that I just wasn't aware of all these details. So thank you for bringing that to the Developers Digest.
Sure, I'm happy to. I just have had a little time to play with AppGyver and work with SAP Process Automation. And they do really cool stuff. They're really easy to learn, yet you can kind of do complex things with a JavaScript if you want, or complex formulas. And you can really control the application and do sophisticated things. Generally speaking, very simply. But I just remembered that we had a trivia question. Is it time to give the answer now?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Thanks for reminding me.
Trivia.
The question, just to repeat it, was SAP released its CAP, Cloud Application Programming Model, to be generally available in what year? Do you have a guess?
Sure. Well, people are talking about it a lot now and last year, so I'll say 2021.
It was recent, but it wasn't that recent. It was 2018 that another Daniel Hutzel, released a blog post that detailed all the general availability items of SAP CAP. And of course, we've changed it a few times since then. So maybe that's why you thought it was so recent.
Wow, I was way off. But I might have been thinking about the new learning journey for CAP. And I think that's much more recent.
Could be. And it's a very cool methodology, as we mentioned. DJ Adams, one of our other developer advocates, he loves it. So if you haven't played with it yet or gone through any of the tutorials or learning journeys, definitely recommend you do that. So check it out. Daniel, I want to thank you so much. It is the end of the show already. I really appreciate you being my co-host for this episode.
Well, I was happy to be here. To be honest, I was a little nervous at the beginning when you first asked me, in fact. But you made it really comfortable here, and I'm glad I joined, and it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I love having other co-hosts. I think it's great for the audience to get to meet other people on the team. And I'm comfortable talking, and I tell my children, it's fun to get nervous. I love that feeling of butterflies. It makes me feel the anticipation of getting ready to do something, and I want it to be a success. So to me, the nerves are also a sign that you want to do a good job. So I know exactly what you mean.
It's a great show, and I'm glad I could contribute to it.
Thank you so much, and hopefully people will tune into the next episode. Talk to you later.
Bye, Josh.
Bye. Go Braves.
That was a great news segment. I really helped.
It's so much fun, isn't it?